Come, pull up a chair by the fire as we share a forgotten tale. This is The Tobacco Conspiracy, The Truth the Industry Silenced, a single spark from the illuminating collection, The Secret History of Science, Volume 1. HistoGate Media has gathered 5 such sparks in this volume. We invite you to find the full collection via the link in the description. Now, let the story warm you.
The Tobacco Conspiracy, The Truth, the Industry Silenced. Chapter 1. The Pact at the Plaza. December 1953. New York's Plaza Hotel gleamed with holiday lights, but nothing was festive about the men assembling behind its gilded doors. They had not come to toast success, but to confront disaster. Together, these were the warlords of American tobacco. Paul M. Hahn of American Tobacco, O. Parker McComas of Philip Morris, and the heads of R.J. Reynolds, Lorillard, and Brown & Williamson, fierce competitors, now summoned as uneasy allies. For decades, they'd sold a product as emblematic as Coca-Cola. But suddenly, their kingdom was trembling. The threat wasn't taxation or even regulation. It was something far more dangerous, the truth. Beneath the reassuring gleam of advertising and ritual, a different story was gaining ground. A 1950 study by Drs. Ernst Winder and Evarts Graham had connected heavy cigarette use to a startling surge in lung cancer. Headlines in Reader's Digest spread panic in American living rooms. Yet panic inside the industry did not truly ignite until weeks earlier, when Winder's latest experiment was unveiled at the Sloan Kettering Institute. This time, there was no statistical debate. Winder painted concentrated cigarette tar onto the shaved backs of laboratory mice. The result was undeniable. Tumors blossomed. For the first time, cancer could be traced from cigarette to skin, visible beneath a microscope. In a stroke, an abstract risk had become a physical certainty. The fallout was immediate. National cigarette sales, rising since the Great Depression, began to slip. Fear spread, eroding trust and threatening to consume fortunes built over lifetimes. The men at the plaza knew, if the story stuck, their entire industry could go up in smoke. What solution did they seek? Not a safer cigarette, not a better understanding of the science. Instead, they called for John W. Hill. Hill, founder of the public relations giant Hill and Knowlton, excelled at one thing: changing public perception. He understood the engine of the modern age, narrative. He often said, "A fact is only as good as the story surrounding it." In a series of tense December meetings, culminating on December 15th, Hill delivered a new battle plan. Silence, he warned, would be read as an admission of guilt. Denial would sound ignorant. They needed a third path. Don't fight the science, Hill instructed. Fund it. Appear as patrons of truth, not enemies of it. Publicly, pledge dedication to public health. Privately, bankroll research engineered to fog the facts, fueling debate and confusion. Make controversy your greatest export. Hill named the industry's new product, doubt. Doubt spreads faster than cancer. It paralyzes the public and politicians alike, shifting certainty into endless, exhausting debate. As long as doubt dominated, action would stall, and profits would survive. That winter night, a pact was sealed. Old rivals united around the table, pooling power and money, not to change their product, but to change the story. Their weapon would be sophisticated, relentless misinformation. The plan's first move: a nationwide ad campaign, a frank statement to cigarette smokers, promising candor and responsibility. Its real aim: to pacify and confuse. The industry also debuted a scientific-sounding organization, the Tobacco Industry Research Committee. It sounded impartial, even noble. Behind closed doors, it operated as a shield and smokescreen. The decision was final. The truth, proven in studies, visible in laboratories, whispered in hospital corridors, would not be faced. It would be managed, spun, and smothered. That night at the Plaza, the war on science began. Chapter 2. Doubt is our product. On January 4, 1954, the conspiracy stepped out from behind closed doors and into the public eye. America awoke to a message spread across 448 newspapers, reaching more than 43 million readers, a carefully orchestrated reassurance called a frank statement to cigarette smokers. This was no denial. Instead, it was a promise, neatly wrapped in the language of responsibility. We accept an interest in people's health as a basic responsibility, paramount to every other consideration in our business. The industry acknowledged the growing anxiety about cigarettes and health, pledging to get to the bottom of the controversy. With this, they introduced their new creation, the Tobacco Industry Research Committee, or TIRC. For a nation on edge, the message soothed and deflected. It suggested partnership and earnest concern. In reality, it was the opening gambit in a campaign to shroud certainty in a thick, engineered fog. The true genius of the plan lay in the details invisible to the public. The TIRC boasted a charter that sounded impartial. It would fund research into every conceivable aspect of tobacco and health. But the industry's real aim wasn't to shine light. It was to multiply shadows. Their choice of leader was as cunning as their public statements. The industry didn't select an outspoken cancer specialist. Instead, they tapped Dr. Clarence Cook Little, a renowned geneticist, former head of the American Cancer Society, and vocal skeptic of environmental links to cancer. Dr. Little's credentials gave the TIRC instant legitimacy. His personal beliefs made him the ideal, respected face to argue that science was anything but settled. Under Little's direction, the TIRC's funding map turned into a carefully charted wilderness of distraction. Millions of dollars flowed not toward lung cancer research, but into studies of genetics, stress, air pollution, industrial exposure, even the metabolism of earthworms. Each new project was another possible what-if, another reason for the public and the press to hesitate, to wonder, to doubt. Journalists striving for balance now found endless alternative explanations. Tobacco lawyers gained an arsenal of other factors to wield in courtrooms. The design was as cynical as it was effective. Each study, no matter how obscure, served to extend the life of controversy. The appearance of endless inquiry became proof for many that real answers remained elusive. The industry's true intentions, though never uttered aloud in advertisements or press releases, eventually became too brazen to hide. In a 1969 internal memo, a Brown and Williamson executive exposed the harsh truth. Doubt is our product, since it is the best means of competing with the body of fact that exists in the mind of the general public. It is also the means of establishing a controversy. With those words, the mask was gone. The TIRC, later reborn as the Council for Tobacco Research, had never been about honest discovery. It was a calculated, well-funded machine engineered not to reveal the truth, but to bury it. While the industry cloaked itself in the language of science, it sent confusion into battle. It gave ignorance credentials, armed uncertainty with footnotes, and guaranteed that for decades, the deadly reality of smoking would be lost beneath a carefully constructed avalanche of doubt. Yet behind the smokescreen, the true irony was taking shape. Even as the industry bought public confusion, its scientists quietly uncovered the truths their leaders desperately sought to suppress. Chapter 3. The Condemned Science. While the Tobacco Industry Research Committee scattered its funding into studies of genetics and air pollution, a far more dangerous kind of inquiry was happening in secret. Hidden behind windowless walls in Winston-Salem, Richmond, and Louisville, the tobacco company's private laboratories became the front lines of a different battle, the battle to understand and quietly confirm the threat within their product. This was not public science, it was damage assessment. The same companies orchestrating confusion in the public sphere were meticulously deconstructing cigarettes in-house, determined to measure the risks they so publicly denied. Their enemy was no longer external accusation. It was an internal truth. The process began as early as 1953, the very year Ernst Winder's mouse-painting experiment triggered crisis meetings in boardrooms. R.J. Reynolds responded not with openness, but with secrecy. Behind closed doors, they launched Project SAR, a coded operation shielded under Special Account Number 4. Their scientists smeared tar from Camel cigarettes onto the skin of lab mice, repeating the same procedure that had alarmed the public. The results were swift and undeniable. Cancerous tumors formed. By 1956, internal memos affirmed what the world was beginning to suspect. The tar their products generated was a potent carcinogen. One researcher wrote flatly that the evidence was overwhelming. These findings never reached the light of day. They were quietly sealed away, reserved for executive eyes and legal counsel. Other giants raced to keep pace. Philip Morris, through files later revealed under the moniker Project Hippo, delved even deeper. Their laboratories didn't just replicate previous studies, they began to map the molecular anatomy of danger. They identified specific carcinogens, including the radioactive isotope polonium-210, lurking in their smoke. They recorded how cigarette smoke destroyed the cilia, the tiny hair-like structures in the lungs that sweep out toxins and protect against infection. They documented, with clinical detachment, every toxic additive blended into the final product. Page after page, the evidence mounted. They knew, and they archived everything. Yet perhaps their most unsettling discovery wasn't about cancer, but addiction. Outwardly, the companies insisted that smoking was a habit, solely a matter of taste and personal choice. Privately, their best scientists were decoding nicotine's grip on the brain. They studied its chemical pathway, its paradoxical power to both soothe and stimulate, and most damningly, its capacity to enslave. By the early 1960s, industry researchers disclosed internally what they dared not confess publicly. They were not simply in the tobacco business, they were in the drug business. This reality became unmistakable in 1963, when Addison Yeaman, a senior lawyer for Brown and Williamson, wrote a memo that would one day become a linchpin of legal reckoning. Yeaman admitted, "We are then in the business of selling nicotine, an addictive drug." Decades later, these words would resound in courtrooms and ignite scandal. At the time, they were just another secret, relegated to a locked file. Knowledge became the most dangerous asset the industry possessed. It was hidden away, encased in vaults, obscured by legal privilege, protected by a code of silence enforced with ironclad confidentiality agreements. Many of the scientists, experts in their field and pioneers in tobacco research, carried the weight of suppressed truth. Their work had revealed the full devastating power of cigarettes long before the rest of the world would ever know. Their charge was not to cure, nor even to warn. It was to quietly chart the damage and bury the evidence. In the end, silence was the industry's strongest shield, a protection built not of ignorance, but of willful, thoroughly documented knowledge, concealed for continued profit and survival. Chapter 4: The Warning and the War. On January 11, 1964, the reckoning arrived. The nation's eyes turned to a carefully orchestrated press conference, scheduled on a Saturday to avoid jolting the stock market. There, Surgeon General Luther Terry unveiled the report that the tobacco industry had feared for years: smoking and health. This was no magazine exposé or academic squabble. This was the verdict of the government. 387 pages, the product of a relentless 14-month investigation by 10 leading scientists, delivered with full federal backing. The message was simple and unyielding: cigarette smoking causes lung cancer in men. The report meticulously linked smoking to chronic bronchitis, emphysema, and heart disease, sounding an alarm that could not be ignored. In an instant, the mounting evidence crystallized into national policy. The debate over smoking's dangers was no longer a matter of opinion. It was a matter of record. For Big Tobacco, a name used to refer to the largest companies in the tobacco industry, the world had changed overnight. The era of plausible deniability ended on that stage. This was public health history, an irreversible shift in the gravity of the conversation. An outright attack on the report now meant suicide, not strategy. So the industry pivoted. Fast. The battleground abruptly shifted. The fight for truth was over. Now it was a war for survival. Industry strategists traded laboratory white coats for courtroom suits and Capitol Hill credentials. The question was no longer, is it dangerous, but does it matter who decides? Their first counterstrike was tactical: pick apart the report's methodology. Scientists funded by the Council for Tobacco Research flooded the media and congressional hearings, insisting the findings were merely statistical, not supported by direct clinical proof. They harped on distinctions, causation versus mechanism, seeded doubts, and exploited scientific caution. By arguing definitions, they preserved a slender thread of uncertainty, but this was just the feint. The real masterstroke was reframing the conflict itself. The public relations campaign swiftly shifted from health to liberty. Smoking, they declared, was not primarily a question of poison. It was a question of individual freedom. Adults, they argued, could judge the risks for themselves. This narrative struck a chord in a country obsessed with personal rights and limited government. Politicians, facing cultural headwinds, seized the opportunity to sidestep the fight. This strategy culminated in a legislative judo move, the Federal Cigarette Labeling and Advertising Act of 1965. On the surface, it was a humiliating loss. Mandatory warning labels finally appeared on every pack. Yet the industry had quietly shaped the law to its advantage. The warning was tepid. Caution: cigarette smoking may be hazardous to your health. More critically, the law's preemption clause barred states from enacting stricter warnings or advertising restrictions. What looked like regulation became armor. With every carton stamped by a federal warning, Big Tobacco now had a defense for the ages. Smokers had been warned by the government itself. Decades of litigation would unravel against this single, ingeniously placed legal barrier. Their greatest threat, a Surgeon General's warning, had become a legal fortress, shielding them from accountability and stalling reform. The war had gone public, and the stakes were higher than ever. But if the industry appeared cornered, it was only an illusion. In reality, they had turned a national condemnation into their most enduring shield, and were just getting started for the siege that would follow. Chapter 5: The Whistleblowers. For decades, the tobacco industry's fortress of lies seemed unbreakable. Built from legal maneuvering and fortified with relentless public relations, it had weathered every scientific assault from the outside. No study, no court summons, no public protest could breach its walls. But its undoing did not come from a frontal attack. The first cracks appeared from within, began quietly with employees who decided they could no longer look away. The first tremor was an unlikely one. In the late 1980s, a paralegal named Merrill Williams worked for the law firm defending Brown and Williamson in Louisville. Day after day, he sifted through the company's most sensitive documents: secret animal studies, confidential memos about nicotine's hold on human brains, and strategic blueprints for burying bad science. Williams, once a smoker himself, had survived heart surgery, a crisis that made him see those files differently. His conscience couldn't take it anymore. In 1988, in a quiet act of rebellion, Williams began to secretly photocopy what others wanted hidden. Little by little, he smuggled the truth out of the office, box by box, page by page. These weren't just corporate memos. They were the DNA of the conspiracy, the receipts, the proof, the actual anatomy of the industry's long deceit. Yet their very weight made them dangerous to handle. Williams tried for years to alert the world, but lawyers and journalists refused to risk exposure to such radioactive material. Only in 1994 did he find someone who would listen: Dr. Stanton Glantz, a determined tobacco researcher at the University of California, San Francisco. Once released to the world as the B&W Papers, The documents became the hard evidence no plaintiff, prosecutor, or policymaker could ignore. If Williams brought the archive, Jeffrey Wigand brought the voice. Wigand, the former vice president of research and development at Brown and Williamson, was the highest-ranking insider to ever turn whistleblower. Fired in 1993 for challenging the ethics of his employers, Wigand reached a moral breaking point. He didn't just agree that lies had been told, he revealed how new ones were being created. Wigand testified that company scientists had deliberately tampered with tobacco chemistry. Their technique, called impact boosting, involved adding ammonia compounds to the tobacco blend. The result? Nicotine molecules were transformed into a freebase form, absorbed faster by the body and brain, making the cigarette dramatically more addictive. He also exposed how research on safer cigarettes was deliberately buried to preserve the illusion that nothing needed to change. Telling the world these truths nearly broke him. Brown and Williamson responded with overwhelming force, suing for breach of confidentiality and unleashing private investigators to dig up, and if possible manufacture, dirt. Their intimidation campaign grew so intense that CBS News, fearing a massive lawsuit, pulled Wigand's explosive interview from its flagship program, 60 Minutes. For a moment, it seemed the fortress would hold. But truth has a way of escaping locks and lawsuits. Details of Wigand's story leaked. A storm of public outrage swept in. The pressure was irresistible. In 1996, CBS finally aired the full interview. America watched as a top tobacco scientist confirmed, in a calm and weary voice, everything the secret papers had already begun to reveal. The fortress was no longer unbreakable. The walls that had seemed so permanent began to shake, loosened by conscience, and ultimately brought down by the courage to speak and the courage to reveal. The endgame had begun. Chapter 6: The Reckoning. The evidence unearthed by Merrill Williams and Jeffrey Wigand was more than a headline. It was legal dynamite waiting for a spark. In 1994, Mississippi Attorney General Mike Moore delivered that spark and changed the war forever. For decades, smokers had tried and failed to hold the tobacco industry accountable. Juries sided with the companies, swayed by the refrain of personal choice. But Moore saw a path the industry hadn't anticipated. He would sue the tobacco giants on behalf of the state itself, demanding repayment for the hundreds of millions spent treating smoking-related illnesses through Medicaid. This time, the fight wasn't about personal responsibility. It was about mass corporate fraud and public money. Armed with the industry's own secret documents, Moore's case accused tobacco companies of conspiring to hide the truth about their products and nicotine's addictive grip, creating a public health emergency at taxpayer expense. His lawsuit became the model, and soon other states followed. Florida, Minnesota, Texas. One by one, they joined the battle. By 1997, a coalition of more than 40 attorneys general had taken up the cause, forging a united front that the industry could neither outspend nor outmaneuver. A legal firestorm raged across the country. The pivotal moment arrived with discovery, a legal process that pried open the industry's vaults and put executives under oath. The most notorious scene played out not in a courthouse, but on national television. On April 14, 1994, the CEOs of America's 7 largest tobacco companies stood before Congress, raised their right hands, and swore, each in turn, that they did not believe nicotine was addictive. The denial was absolute. It was also unsustainable, as their internal memos at last being revealed contradicted them at every turn. Pressure mounted from all directions. The lawsuits multiplied. Boxes full of compromising documents appeared. Public outrage grew. The once impenetrable fortress of big tobacco began to buckle, not from a single blow, but from the relentless advance of truth. Their legal resources were vast, but even they couldn't withstand a siege of this scale. Finally, the industry capitulated. In November 1998, the Master Settlement Agreement (MSA) was signed, an act of negotiated surrender without precedent in American history. The companies agreed to pay the states a staggering $206 billion over 25 years. They accepted harsh new marketing restrictions. Cartoon mascots like Joe Camel disappeared, as did bus ads and sports sponsorships. It was the largest civil settlement ever recorded. Yet the deepest wound was not financial. The MSA forced the opening of the industry's archives. Millions of pages of internal documents, the hidden science, the marketing schemes, the legal blueprints for deceit, were released to the public and uploaded into an online repository. The conspiracy, born in secret and locked away for decades, was now stamped into digital permanence. The fortress had fallen, ash and archive fused together, evidence and consequence, meticulously documented, forever on display. The industry that had bet on secrecy for half a century found its greatest secrets turned into a monument against itself. The record would never be sealed again. Chapter 7. The Playbook's Echo. The human cost of the tobacco conspiracy is measured not in newsprint or numbers, but in the spaces left behind. At dinner tables, in photo albums, in the silence after the phone stops ringing. It is a catastrophe hidden in plain sight. Between 1964 and the end of the century, more than 10 million Americans died from smoking-related diseases. These deaths are not random. They are the predictable outcome of a corporate strategy built on secrecy, denial, and delay. Each loss marks a life that might have been saved had the truth been told when industry scientists first uncovered it. That half-century of silence will stand always as one of modern history's most lethal betrayals. The tobacco industry's most dangerous legacy is not a product, but a method, a playbook. Forged in crisis, perfected in the laboratories of spin, it became the template for any industry threatened by inconvenient science. At its core are 5 ruthless lessons. First, manufacture uncertainty. Flood the field with diversionary research, making settled science seem perpetually in doubt. Second, buy credibility. Pay reputable experts to serve as public skeptics, lending confusion a veneer of authority. Third, attack the messenger. Undermine and discredit independent scientists whose findings threaten profits. Fourth, shift the narrative. Reframe public debates from health and harm to personal choice and individual freedom, deflecting regulation and blame. Fifth, obstruct action. Lobby relentlessly to block, weaken, or delay government intervention, even after the truth is undeniable. This playbook did not vanish with tobacco. Its echoes ring through every battle where industry collides with science. When climate scientists revealed the risks of global warming, fossil fuel companies followed the script. Internal studies confirmed the threat. Publicly, they funded front groups, promoted doubt, and insisted that climate models were unreliable and that the vision of catastrophe was uncertain. The refrain, "The science isn't settled." Regulation would cripple the economy. Responsibility is personal, could have come straight from a tobacco boardroom. The opioid epidemic repeated the cycle. Purdue Pharma and its peers downplayed addiction risk, sponsored studies to muddy the waters, and blamed suffering not on OxyContin, but on bad apples, individual patients and doctors. The pattern repeats itself with persistent chemicals, processed foods, and more. Create confusion, sow doubt, delay action. The forced release of tobacco's secret archive gave the world more than historical evidence of wrongdoing. It provided a living blueprint for contending with modern disinformation. We now know the tricks, we have the receipts. The only real question is what we will do with that knowledge. Now that the playbook is written, exposed, and readily available, will we finally recognize it in action when the next crisis comes? Or will we again let silence and denial buy another half-century of preventable loss?
We hope this story has brought you a little closer to the warmth of the truth. Thank you for listening to The Tobacco Conspiracy, The Truth the Industry Silenced, from The Secret History of Science, Volume 1. This was just one of 5 tales told in this collection. The other stories waiting to be shared are The Tesla Enigma, Unveiling the Hidden Legacy of a Genius, The biological cost of Apollo missions, the radiation NASA downplayed. A Poison for Progress, the story of leaded gasoline. Animal intelligence, a scientific silencing. Each narrative sheds light on the untold side of discovery. To own all 5 ad-free stories, the link to purchase the full collection is in the description. Keep an ear out for Volume 2. Please subscribe for more tales from the secret history of science. Thank you for sharing this time with us.